Hello, Charles County. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Inside Your County Government. I'm Doria Fleisher, your Community Engagement Coordinator. In this episode, we will be talking about how Charles County government prepares for and responds to a sensitive and pertinent issue, the identification, recognition, response, and preservation of burial grounds discovered in the county. This topic is especially relevant right now because of recent events over the past few years. We're recording this episode on June 26, 2024, in response to community concerns about events that began occurring in 2021. During gravel mining operations on June 15, 2021, contractors discovered an unmarked burial ground in what would become the Parklands neighborhood, which is located in St. Charles in White Plains. The site was later determined to contain the remains of 6 individuals believed to be of European descent. In response to this discovery, Charles County immediately halted all development activity in the area, worked to determine the limits of the cemetery and cultural affiliation, revised the mining plans, and redesigned the future development to protect the burial ground. Eventually, the remains were reinterred in a respectful manner. Some community members that heard about the discovery of the remains became concerned that the process was not handled in a respectful manner and that protections were not in place to identify and preserve similar sites. The Board of County Commissioners and staff are aware of these concerns and questions, and it was discussed in public session on June 25th, 2024. Because we recognize how important it is for us to be as transparent and responsive as possible to our community's concerns, we wanted to respond to these events and concerns by providing information about this specific discovery, as well as the universal processes and protections that we have in place for when discoveries like this occur. Joining me here today to provide information and education are 2 of our dedicated Charles County government employees who handle all things related to planning and preservation. Cathy Thompson, our Assistant Chief of Planning, and Esther Read, your County Archaeologist. Cathy and Esther, thank you for joining us here today.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
Thank you for having us.
So this is such an interesting and delicate topic to talk about, right? And I want to make sure that we give a little bit of information about recent events starting in 2021 about this specific site, but also this is just part of the work that you all do all the time, yes?
Well, the discovery of burial grounds is not an everyday occurrence. It's something that rarely happens, but when it does, there are protocols that we follow to make sure that those burial grounds are taken care of and that they're not disturbed.
Excellent. All right. So before we dive into what those protocols are, I'd love to hear a little bit about how your positions are involved in this. So, Cathy, when we talk about preservation and planning, how do those 2 things work together to make sure that historic sites are protected during development and as the county grows?
Sure, absolutely. So when a development application is made, that plan is received and distributed to a whole range of planners and subject matter experts. So we have reviewers that look at environmental resources, adequate public facilities, transportation, and then, of course, as part of that review, our preservation planners look at potential impacts to cultural resources.
Because some things we might already know, right? We might already be aware that an area that's being worked on has impact, yeah?
Yes, okay. Absolutely. So we have a pretty good database on known historic sites, especially for standing structures. So staff look at all of those resources that are known. And then in the case of archaeological resources, often those sites aren't known. So we have Esther Read, our county archaeologist, who has expertise on what to look for each individual property. So she'll look at the probability of whether or not it's likely that a site is located on this property. And there's a whole complex assessment process that goes into just identifying whether or not a project is likely to have historic resources and if the project would negatively impact those.
So we go into each of these projects knowing that there's a risk of impact and knowing that we need to be prepared for it. Is that an accurate statement?
Correct.
Excellent. And Esther, can you talk a little bit about the protocols that we have in place to ensure that if a burial ground is discovered in that process, how do we know that it's going to be recognized, protected, and commemorated appropriately?
Well, if during the development process in the early stages when an archaeological survey is being done, if the contracting archaeologist finds one, they notify me, and that is put onto the plat so that it is preserved in perpetuity.
So step one, we have to say it's there.
We have to say it's
Okay.
there. And we don't only have to say that because of the county regulations, but it's also state law that you cannot disturb burial grounds.
Okay.
Okay. So, but what happens if something unexpected turns up?
Right.
Because even though we try our best with the archaeological survey, sometimes you don't always recognize a burial ground on the surface.
Right.
And you may run into it accidentally while you're scraping earth off.
Okay.
All work is supposed to stop. You're supposed to contact me, contact the state's attorney, contact the local police.
Interesting. Okay, so this is beyond just an archaeology thing at this point.
Yes.
Now this becomes really a legal matter.
It becomes a legal matter.
Okay.
Because it's a cemetery.
Okay, so once law enforcement and state's attorney is notified, what happens?
Well, the police generally come out, and if there's any of the remains that are on the surface, they will collect them. And they will take them to Baltimore to the forensics lab because they need to determine whether it's a crime scene or not. Once the forensic anthropologist or the forensics person in Baltimore determines, this is a recent murder victim or not,
Right.
then the remains are returned to the jurisdiction for reburial.
Okay, and I would assume that this process takes time, yes?
It does take.
Okay.
It could take up to several months or over a year.
Wow. Okay. And are there any things that change depending on, what we find about that burial ground? So I think I'm talking specifically about in 2024, we are trying so hard to be much more respectful
Right.
of our indigenous communities. Yes.
Yes.
So this burial ground that we're referring to that was discovered in 2021, these were people of European descent. Yes.
They were Europeans, yes.
Okay. What would happen if it was determined that a burial ground of our indigenous community?
Well, if it's an indigenous burial ground, I make a couple of phone calls. I contact the tribal leads.
Okay.
And I'm also supposed to call the Maryland Historical Trust and talk to the state administrator of archaeology. At that point, it's out of my hands. The tribe and the state consult, and they decide what's best for the remains.
Interesting. So we've got a lot of different agencies involved and a couple of different protocols to
Yes.
make sure that when something's discovered, it's handled
Right.
in the most appropriate way possible.
Yes.
Okay. And what other burial grounds in Charles County are we aware of that have maybe turned up in this same unexpected way?
There was a historic African-American church over by the African-American Heritage House that appeared in the woods.
Okay.
And my crew and I went out and we walked over the surface. Now, with that one, you could actually see where the graves had been because they had partially collapsed and you were getting those kind of divots in the ground. And there were 75 of them. So we were able to delineate it and put it onto the GIS layer that we have. The county has a GIS system, and you can actually turn a cemetery layer on. And
So
see
now
where
we
they
know
are.
it's there, and that if,
Yes.
heaven forbid, I mean, I don't think it would, but if anybody ever wanted to dig in that area, that would be one of those, don't do this,
Yeah.
we know this is here. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. That makes sense.
And we actually have a pretty good existing inventory of private burial grounds that, thanks to the work of volunteers over the years, the work of historians and archaeologists, I mean, there are always unmarked
Right.
cemeteries that are out there. We, I'm sure, haven't captured 100%, but we do have a good list already to use to flag development projects when they come in.
Excellent. So we're as proactive as possible, and then those protocols that Esther was describing are the reactive if something is
Right.
discovered for the first time.
Right.
And what I would really love to see is I'd love to have our citizens call in and say, hey, there's a cemetery, out behind my barn, in the field, by my house, so that I can go out, record it, take photographs, and get it into our system so it's protected.
So all of those kind of, well, we've known about this in my family for years. This just existed.
Yeah.
The more people can let us know, then we can
Exactly.
get ahead of it too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So that leads into another question I want to ask, which is, for people who either have been concerned about this specific event that we've referenced or are listening to this episode and thinking this is something they'd love to learn more about, they want to get more involved, how can our community become more involved in understanding and contributing to the work that you're doing?
Well, in terms of the archaeology, every Monday I have a group of very dedicated volunteers. Many of them are members of the Charles County Archaeological Society of Maryland. And they come out on Mondays, and we either do lab work where we're processing artifacts, or we're working on an archaeological site somewhere in the county, generally on a county property. Occasionally we will do things on private property if we are invited by the owner.
That makes sense.
They have a very active a club where they meet once a month and they have speakers. And so if you come and you join us in Port Tobacco on Mondays, then you can get to know some of these people and they'll get you hooked into other opportunities.
Beautiful. And I'll make sure the information is in the show notes. But Esther, how can somebody get involved in that? How would they contact you or contact the group?
Well, the best thing to do is to send me an email.
And people can always reach out to my email through communityengagement@charlescountymd.gov, and I can put them in touch with you.
Okay, that sounds really great. Thank you.
Kathy, how else? I know you have kind of the Esther gets to be in the field doing the work, and a lot of times you have to be in the meetings, perhaps the less hands-on, but just as important aspect. How can community members, if they're not sure they want to be in the field working with Esther, but they want to be doing engaged in the work you're doing?
Well, one of the things I wanted to make sure I mentioned as well is, in addition to identifying historic resources, there's also this other process that involves the Historic Preservation Commission, and that's a great organization to connect with. But part of what happens when we find that there's a cultural resource, a historic site, or an archaeological site on property that's being developed, the requirement is that the applicant submit a preservation plan because every site is different, right? And what's appropriate for one site wouldn't be appropriate for another. So we work very closely with the applicants, the property owners, and the Historic Preservation Commission to develop a preservation plan for each site moving forward. And that was certainly the case with this burial grounds. Yes. And I think that's an important part. It's not just staff, it's not just the property owner. There's a community component where this the Historic Preservation Commission, an appointed board, really gets to weigh in and craft what's appropriate for this site moving forward.
And what I appreciate when you say that is it sounds like these are some naturally embedded checks and balances that help us do the right thing. They don't rely on one person making the right decision. These are processes that are followed by a variety of individuals to make sure that the process is respectful, yes?
Right. Well, the burial ground at Parklands, the contractual archaeologist did some more in-depth research and discovered that it was on a plantation called Hopewell. So we've now named it the Hopewell Cemetery. And the Historic Preservation Commission, in consultation with me and the owners and the other archaeologists, came up with a plan that it will be preserved on a lot in the subdivision. There will be a historic sign that tells you the history of the graveyard, and there's going to be natural plantings as a place for contemplation, serenity, and quiet for the community to come and think about the past.
I respect that level of reverence, that not only was the discovery made and the area is protected, but that we're actually going to recognize that it's there. It's not now cover it back up and forget about it. It is now part of our community's future as well as our community's history. Yep. That's lovely.
And it was also very important as part of the process to make sure that the remains were treated as respectfully as possible. So there was a lot of discussion about the best way to handle that, and a lot of consultation, and we eventually had an undertaker involved, and we had a religious ceremony on site to reinter these remains. So I definitely want the community to understand that the utmost care and respect was given to these individuals.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I so appreciate you both taking the time to go through this process that I think for those of us in the community that don't do the work you do, this is totally foreign to us. So I appreciate knowing that this is something that we have the processes for, and that the experts in the room like you guys are really working hard to preserve our history while also helping the county grow and do things the right way. Yeah. Thank you. And Cathy, I know you touched briefly on the historic preservation. The Preservation Commission. Do you mind touching again on that, just so residents know more about that group?
Absolutely. The Historic Preservation Commission meets monthly on, Esther may be able to fill us in on the exact.
Second Wednesday of the month, and it's like at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
It runs for about an hour to 2 hours. It's always virtual.
Okay.
You can go onto the county government website and find the information. The information about where you would get the link is also there.
Everything should be on our government calendar, so I'll make sure that gets included in the show notes as well, so people can tune in.
Okay. If you want to see what the minutes were, they're posted. The agendas. Sometimes there's also other additional information online that we've talked about in the past.
All public record.
All public record.
Awesome.
Yes, but if anyone would like to attend a meeting, just reach out to staff and we can send you the link so you can join. We'd love to have there's opportunities for guests to appear and to just observe or to speak on any matter that's important to them.
That's excellent. Thank you. Cathy and Esther, before we wrap up today, is there anything else that while you have the opportunity you want to share with our community that you wish they knew about the work you did, or that you wish that they would share with their neighbors and communities? I'm a firm believer that, if we can get information out into our community, we all benefit, that people know about the work that government's doing, but that also we get more feedback from the community when they're more involved. So is there anything else you wanted to share?
Well, I do a lot of review, et cetera, for the developments. A big part of what I'm doing is the public programming and outreach. So I love it when the public comes to spend time with us. I love it when I get school groups that come. So please, reach out, let me know. You're always welcome in the lab or out in the field.
And I have to say, on a personal note, Esther, as somebody who's on my own time gone and spent time with you, your group has a wonderful time out there, and I learn something new every time I'm with you. I'm not always your most patient person. I know I get really bored very easily, but I so appreciate that the rest of your group, the time and intention and science that you give to this work is just so wonderful. So thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think it's evident, but we have staff who are passionate and committed to preservation, and they're out there working every day to identify these resources, to make sure they're protected, and to really celebrate those and to share that with the rest of the community. So by all means, if you have an opportunity to visit Esther in some of the public archaeology in Port Tobacco, I think you'll get just a taste of that. And if there are ever any concerns about protecting resources, we're here to work with you.
Thank you so much. Cathy Thompson, our Assistant Chief of Planning, Esther Read, our County Archaeologist. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, our audience and residents, for being so engaged with the work we're doing to both preserve and protect Charles County's history, as well as continuing to build and grow our community. Take care, stay safe, and stay engaged. For more information on Charles County government, visit our website, www.charlescountymd.gov. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe to the county's e-news. You can also get many alerts through the citizen notification system. Don't forget to watch CCG TV on Comcast Channel 95 or Verizon Fios 10. We're also streaming on Apple TV and Roku devices. Just search Charles County Government. You can get all of our great podcast content wherever you get your podcasts by searching Charles County Government. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.